the exact spot that Volko gave me my first swimming lesson.
I already know.
My parents made me what I am.
Aquaman is a superhero action fantasy film released in 2018 based on the famous DC Comics character Aquaman. The movie was directed by James Wan and produced by Peter Safran and Rob Cowan under the production companies Warner Bros. Pictures, DC Films, and the Safran Company. The movie had a massive budget of nearly $160 million and became one of the highest-grossing DC movies ever by earning more than $1 billion worldwide. The film stars Jason Momoa as Arthur Curry, also known as Aquaman, while Amber Heard plays Princess Mera and Patrick Wilson appears as King Orm. Visually, the movie became famous for its breathtaking underwater world. Giant sea creatures, colorful kingdoms, massive action scenes, and emotional family story that mixes fantasy, adventure, war, and superhero drama together in a huge cinematic experience. The story begins during a violent storm at sea where lighthouse keeper Thomas Curry discovers an injured woman lying unconscious near the ocean rocks during the middle of the night. Emotionally, the atmosphere feels mysterious and magical because the woman appears completely different from ordinary humans. Thomas carefully rescues her and brings her inside his lighthouse where he slowly helps her recover from her injuries. Visually, the scenes create a peaceful contrast against the dangerous ocean outside because the warm lighthouse becomes a place of safety and emotional comfort. Meanwhile, the mysterious woman eventually reveals her identity as Atlanta, the queen of the underwater kingdom Atlantis, who escaped from her world after refusing an arranged political marriage. Emotionally, Thomas becomes fascinated by her kindness, strength, and sadness while Atlanta slowly experiences peaceful human life for the very first time. Visually, the romance between them develops beautifully through calm ocean sunsets, quiet conversations, warm family moments, and emotional scenes showing two completely different worlds slowly connecting together through love. Meanwhile, Atlanta teaches Thomas about Atlantis, the hidden underwater civilization filled with advanced technology, giant sea creatures, ancient kingdoms, and dangerous political conflicts. Emotionally, Thomas realizes her world is far more complicated and dangerous than he ever imagined. Eventually, Thomas and Atlanta fall deeply in love and later have a son named Arthur Curry, who becomes the bridge between the human world and Atlantis because he inherits powers from both sides of his family. Visually, young Arthur appears extraordinary from childhood because he can communicate with sea creatures and survive underwater far longer than ordinary humans. Emotionally, Arthur grows up struggling to understand where he truly belongs because humans see him as strange while Atlantis views him as an outsider due to his mixed bloodline. Meanwhile, Atlanta lovingly teaches Arthur about courage, compassion, and responsibility while Thomas tries giving him a peaceful human childhood away from the political dangers of Atlantis. However, their peaceful life eventually changes when Atlantean soldiers arrive searching for Atlanta because the underwater kingdom refuses forgiving her escape from royal duty. Visually, the action suddenly becomes intense through armored underwater warriors, glowing weapons, crashing waves, and spectacular combat inside the lighthouse during a violent storm. Emotionally, Arthur witnesses his mother fighting fearlessly to protect her family, which deeply shapes his understanding of bravery and sacrifice. Meanwhile, Atlanta realizes her family will never remain safe while she stays with them because Atlantis will continue hunting her endlessly. Emotionally, the farewell between Atlanta, Thomas, and young Arthur becomes heartbreaking because she knows leaving her family is the only way to protect them from greater danger. Visually, the emotional atmosphere becomes tragic through crashing rain, dark oceans, painful silence, and tearful goodbyes, showing how love becomes separated by political power and destiny. After Atlanta leaves, Arthur grows up carrying emotional pain and confusion because he never fully understands why his mother disappeared from his life. Meanwhile, Thomas continues raising Arthur alone while encouraging him to use his extraordinary abilities responsibly instead of becoming consumed by anger or hatred toward Atlantis. Visually, young Arthur's powers continue growing stronger as he develops superhuman strength, underwater breathing, incredible swimming speed, and the rare ability to communicate with sea creatures. However, emotionally, Arthur still feels disconnected from both the human world and Atlantis because he belongs completely to neither side. Meanwhile, strange rumors begin spreading across the oceans about growing tensions between Atlantis and the surface world because pollution, wars, and human activity continue damaging the oceans. Emotionally, Arthur slowly realizes his destiny may eventually force him into the dangerous political conflict between humans and Atlantis, whether he wants it or not. Visually, Aquaman begins combining fantasy adventure, emotional family storytelling, underwater mythology, giant action sequences, political conflict, destiny, and superhero drama while exploring how identity, responsibility, family love, sacrifice, power, and the connection between two worlds slowly shape Arthur Curry into the future hero known as Aquaman. Aquaman continues as Arthur Curry grows older while struggling to balance his human life with the extraordinary powers and responsibilities connected to Atlantis. Visually, the movie expands its breathtaking underwater world through giant oceans. Glowing underwater cities, ancient kingdoms, massive sea creatures, advanced Atlantean technology, colorful armor, and emotionally powerful cinematography that constantly creates a magical fantasy atmosphere mixed with large-scale action and adventure. Meanwhile, Arthur spends most of his life protecting innocent people near the oceans while secretly helping ships and sailors survive dangerous situations without revealing his true identity completely to the world. Emotionally, Arthur remains deeply affected by the loss of his mother because he still believes Atlantis destroyed his family and stole the peaceful life he once had with his parents. Meanwhile, Thomas Curry continues living alone inside the lighthouse while constantly hoping Atlanta might someday return from the underwater world despite many years passing without any sign of her survival. Visually, the lighthouse continues representing emotional warmth, family memories, and safety compared to the dangerous political conflicts happening beneath the oceans. Meanwhile, Arthur's powers continue growing stronger as he develops incredible combat abilities. Superhuman strength, underwater breathing, and the rare power to communicate with sea creatures. Emotionally, Arthur still struggles with his identity because humans see him as strange while Atlantis considers him an outsider due to his mixed bloodline. Meanwhile, deep beneath the oceans, the kingdom of Atlantis becomes increasingly unstable because King Orm believes humanity is destroying the seas through pollution, wars, and environmental damage. Visually, Atlantis appears breathtaking through glowing architecture. Giant underwater armies, futuristic weapons, advanced vehicles, massive sea creatures, and colorful kingdoms hidden beneath the oceans for thousands of years. Emotionally, Orm becomes consumed by anger toward the surface world because he believes humans will eventually destroy the oceans completely unless Atlantis takes control first. Meanwhile, Orm secretly plans uniting the 7 underwater kingdoms into one massive empire powerful enough to wage war against humanity and force the surface world into submission. Emotionally, his obsession with protecting Atlantis slowly transforms into dangerous ambition and political extremism. Meanwhile, Princess Mera begins worrying about Orm's growing aggression because she understands war between Atlantis and humanity would cause unimaginable destruction across the entire planet. Visually, Mera appears powerful and intelligent through her advanced combat skills, royal armor, and unique ability to control water during battle. Emotionally, she believes Arthur may be the only person capable of stopping Orm because Arthur possesses both human compassion and Atlantean power. Meanwhile, Arthur continues avoiding Atlantis because emotionally he wants nothing to do with the kingdom that destroyed his family and separated him from his mother. However, mysterious events across the oceans slowly force him closer toward the dangerous political conflict happening underwater. Meanwhile, pirate mercenaries led by David Kane attack a Russian submarine in the middle of the ocean while attempting to steal advanced military technology for profit. Visually, the action sequences become intense through explosions, gunfire, flooding corridors, underwater combat, and giant waves crashing against the submarine during violent storms. Emotionally, the pirates care only about money and survival while innocent sailors become trapped inside the chaos surrounding them. Meanwhile, Arthur suddenly arrives during the attack and single-handedly defeats the heavily armed mercenaries using his incredible strength, speed, and combat abilities. Visually, the fight scenes become spectacular through underwater action. Giant explosions, close combat, and Arthur effortlessly overpowering enemies while protecting innocent people trapped aboard the submarine. Emotionally, Arthur remains fearless during danger because years of surviving between two worlds transformed him into a confident and powerful fighter. However, during the battle, David Kane witnesses Arthur indirectly causing the death of his father, which fills him with overwhelming hatred and emotional rage. Meanwhile, Arthur chooses saving innocent sailors instead of rescuing Kane's father because emotionally he believes protecting the greater number of lives matters more than saving dangerous criminals responsible for violence and murder. Visually, the emotional atmosphere becomes darker as Kane watches his father die while blaming Arthur completely for the tragedy. Emotionally, this painful moment eventually transforms David Kane into one of Aquaman's deadliest future enemies, driven entirely by revenge and hatred. Meanwhile, Orm secretly manipulates global tensions by attacking human ships and blaming surface nations for acts of aggression against Atlantis in order to justify war. Emotionally, his political strategies become increasingly dangerous because fear and anger begin spreading throughout the underwater kingdoms. Meanwhile, Mera realizes time is running out because Orm's growing influence could soon unite Atlantis into a massive military force capable of destroying humanity. Visually, Aquaman continues blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, political conflict, giant sea battles, revenge, destiny, and breathtaking visual effects while exploring how identity, responsibility, family loss, power, and the connection between two different worlds slowly shape Arthur Curry into the legendary hero destined to become Aquaman. Aquaman continues as tensions between Atlantis and the surface world grow increasingly dangerous while Arthur Curry slowly becomes drawn deeper into the political conflict threatening both civilizations. Visually, the movie expands its breathtaking underwater fantasy world through glowing ocean kingdoms, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean technology, massive armies, colorful underwater cities, ancient ruins, and emotionally powerful cinematography that constantly creates a magical atmosphere mixed with large-scale action and superhero adventure. Meanwhile, King Orm continues pushing Atlantis closer toward war against humanity because he believes humans are poisoning the oceans through pollution, violence, and environmental destruction. Emotionally, Orm becomes increasingly consumed by anger and ambition because he sees himself not only as a ruler but as the future savior of Atlantis, destined to unite the underwater kingdoms under his control. Visually, Orm appears intimidating through royal armor, giant armies, powerful weapons, and dramatic underwater speeches that inspire loyalty among Atlantean soldiers preparing for battle. Meanwhile, Princess Mera secretly travels to the surface world searching for Arthur because emotionally she believes he may be the only person capable of preventing catastrophic war between Atlantis and humanity. Visually, Mera experiences human civilization with curiosity and confusion because the surface world feels completely different from the underwater kingdoms where she spent her entire life. Meanwhile, Arthur initially refuses helping Atlantis because emotionally he still carries pain and anger toward the kingdom that separated him from his mother and destroyed his peaceful childhood. However, Mera explains that Orm plans uniting all 7 underwater kingdoms into one unstoppable empire powerful enough to attack the surface world and force humanity into submission. Emotionally, Arthur slowly realizes millions of innocent lives could be destroyed if Orm gains complete power over Atlantis. Meanwhile, Orm launches a massive attack against the surface world by sending giant ocean waves crashing into coastal cities as a warning to humanity. Visually, the scenes become spectacular and terrifying through enormous tsunamis, flooding streets, sinking ships, destroyed buildings, and chaos spreading across cities as Atlantean weapons emerge from the oceans. Emotionally, humans everywhere become frightened because they finally realize powerful civilizations truly exist beneath the seas. Meanwhile, Arthur witnesses the destruction caused by Orm's growing aggression and begins understanding that ignoring Atlantis is no longer possible because the conflict now threatens the entire planet. Emotionally, Arthur struggles with accepting responsibility because he never wanted becoming involved in royal politics or ancient prophecies connected to Atlantis. However, Mera believes Arthur possesses qualities Orm lacks, including compassion, humanity, courage, and emotional understanding of both worlds. Meanwhile, Vulko, the former royal advisor of Atlantis and loyal supporter of Queen Atlana, secretly meets Arthur and reveals more truths about his family history and Atlantean politics. Visually, Volko appears wise and mysterious while teaching Arthur ancient combat techniques and explaining the legends surrounding Atlantis and the rightful ruler of the oceans. Emotionally, Volko believes Arthur was always destined to become king because he carries the bloodline of Atlantis combined with human compassion. However, Arthur doubts himself because emotionally he still feels like an outsider rejected by both worlds. Meanwhile, Orm continues manipulating political alliances among the underwater kingdoms while presenting himself as the protector of Atlantis against humanity. Emotionally, his growing obsession with power becomes more dangerous because he genuinely believes war is necessary for survival. Visually, the underwater kingdoms appear increasingly magnificent through giant underwater armies riding sea creatures. Futuristic Atlantean ships, glowing architecture, massive battle formations, and colorful royal ceremonies showing the enormous scale of Atlantis civilization. Meanwhile, Arthur begins training more seriously under Volko's guidance while preparing for the possibility of confronting Orm directly. Visually, the combat training scenes become exciting through underwater battles, superhuman speed, giant weapons, and advanced fighting styles unique to Atlantean warriors. Emotionally, Arthur slowly gains confidence as he begins accepting that his extraordinary powers may carry responsibilities larger than his personal anger or fears. Meanwhile, David Kane survives the submarine disaster and becomes consumed by hatred toward Arthur because he blames him completely for his father's death. Emotionally, Kane's desire for revenge grows stronger until it becomes the central purpose driving his life. Meanwhile, Orm secretly contacts Kane and provides him with advanced Atlantean technology because emotionally Orm views Kane as a useful weapon capable of distracting or weakening Arthur during the growing political conflict. Visually, Kane's transformation begins through advanced weapons, powerful armor, experimental technology, and dangerous combat equipment that slowly turn him into a deadly enemy capable of challenging Aquaman directly. Emotionally, the movie continues showing how revenge, grief, anger, and political ambition slowly shape different characters into heroes or villains depending upon the choices they make. Visually, Aquaman continues blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, underwater mythology, fantasy adventure, political conflict, giant sea battles, revenge, destiny, and breathtaking visual effects while exploring how identity, responsibility, family loss, compassion, power, and the connection between two different worlds slowly shape Arthur Curry into the future king of Atlantis and the legendary hero known as Aquaman. Aquaman continues as Arthur Curry becomes increasingly involved in the dangerous struggle for control over Atlantis while the growing conflict between the underwater kingdoms and humanity threatens global destruction. Visually, the movie becomes even more breathtaking through glowing underwater cities, giant sea creatures, massive Atlantean armies, advanced technology, colorful royal palaces, ancient ruins, and emotionally powerful cinematography that constantly combines fantasy adventure with superhero action on an enormous scale. Meanwhile, King Orm continues strengthening his political influence by convincing more underwater kingdoms that humanity represents a deadly threat to the oceans and must be stopped before it destroys Atlantis forever. Emotionally, Orm becomes increasingly obsessed with power because he genuinely believes only absolute control can protect his people and restore Atlantean dominance over the planet. Visually, Orm appears intimidating through royal armor, giant battle formations, futuristic weapons, and dramatic speeches delivered before enormous underwater armies preparing for war. Meanwhile, Arthur reluctantly begins accepting that he may be the only person capable of preventing catastrophic conflict between Atlantis and humanity because both worlds continue moving closer toward total war. Emotionally, Arthur still struggles with feelings of anger and rejection toward Atlantis because the kingdom destroyed his family and forced his mother away from him during childhood. However, Princess Mera and Volko continue encouraging Arthur to embrace his destiny because they believe his compassion and mixed heritage make him uniquely capable of uniting both worlds peacefully. Meanwhile, Volko explains the ancient legend of the Trident of Atlan, a powerful weapon once belonging to Atlantis, first king which can only be claimed by the true ruler worthy of leading Atlantis. Visually, the legendary weapon becomes surrounded by mystery through ancient murals, Underwater temples, forgotten ruins, giant sea monsters, and stories passed down across generations about the lost king who once united the oceans. Emotionally, Arthur doubts whether he deserves becoming king because he never wanted political power and still sees himself as an outsider unwanted by Atlantis. Meanwhile, Mera remains determined to help Arthur because emotionally she believes Orm's growing extremism will destroy both Atlantis and humanity unless someone stops him quickly. Visually, Mera continues demonstrating incredible combat abilities and her power to manipulate water during dangerous situations. Meanwhile, Orm officially declares himself Ocean Master and begins gathering military support from the underwater kingdoms in preparation for war against the surface world. Emotionally, many Atlanteans support him because years of pollution and human activity convinced them humanity truly deserves punishment. Visually, the underwater political ceremonies become spectacular through giant armies, glowing underwater architecture, royal armor, sea creatures, and enormous battle fleets preparing for conquest. Meanwhile, David Kane secretly works with Atlantean scientists and engineers to create advanced armor and weapons powerful enough to defeat Arthur in battle. Emotionally, Kane's hatred toward Aquaman completely consumes him because he blames Arthur for his father's death and ruined life. Visually, Kane's transformation into Black Manta becomes dramatic through glowing red armor. Experimental Atlantean weapons, giant laser technology, and deadly combat equipment that make him one of Aquaman's most dangerous enemies. Meanwhile, Arthur and Mera begin searching for clues connected to the lost trident of Atlan because they realize only the rightful king capable of claiming the legendary weapon can unite Atlantis peacefully and defeat Orm's growing empire. Visually, their journey becomes adventurous and exciting through hidden maps, ancient puzzles, mysterious ruins, dangerous traps, and legendary locations connected to Atlantis. Forgotten history. Emotionally, Arthur and Mera slowly grow closer during their dangerous mission because both understand the enormous responsibility now resting upon them. Meanwhile, Thomas Curry continues waiting near the lighthouse hoping Atlana may someday return despite many years passing without answers. Emotionally, these scenes create powerful emotional contrast against the giant political conflicts and warfare happening beneath the oceans because Thomas still believes love and hope matter more than power or violence. Meanwhile, Orm launches increasingly aggressive attacks designed to provoke humanity and justify larger military action against the surface world. Visually, the action sequences become massive through giant tidal waves. Underwater battles, explosions, futuristic Atlantean ships, collapsing structures, and high-speed combat across oceans and coastal cities. Emotionally, the world slowly realizes war between Atlantis and humanity could destroy millions of innocent lives if nobody stops Orm's growing ambitions soon. Meanwhile, Arthur begins understanding that being Aquaman means more than possessing extraordinary powers because emotionally he must eventually choose whether to continue running from his destiny or finally accept the responsibility of protecting both worlds from destruction. Visually, Aquaman continues blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, political conflict, revenge, destiny, giant sea battles, and breathtaking visual effects while exploring how identity, responsibility, leadership, compassion, family loss, power, and the connection between two worlds slowly shape Arthur Curry into the future king of Atlantis and the legendary hero known as Aquaman. Aquaman continues as Arthur Curry and Princess Mera travel across dangerous locations searching for the legendary trident of Atlan while King Orm's growing military power pushes Atlantis and humanity closer toward catastrophic war. Visually, the movie becomes even more spectacular through glowing underwater kingdoms, ancient ruins, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean technology, massive armies, colorful underwater landscapes, and emotionally powerful cinematography that constantly blends fantasy adventure with superhero action on a breathtaking scale. Meanwhile, Arthur still struggles emotionally with accepting his Atlantean destiny because he spent most of his life feeling rejected by both the surface world and Atlantis due to his mixed bloodline. However, Mera continues encouraging him because emotionally she believes Arthur's humanity, compassion, and courage make him far more worthy of becoming king than Orm, whose growing obsession with power and revenge threatens both civilizations. Meanwhile, Orm continues uniting the underwater kingdoms under his control while presenting himself as the protector of Atlantis against humanity's pollution and destruction of the oceans. Emotionally, many Atlanteans support him because they genuinely believe the surface world deserves punishment after centuries of environmental damage and violence. Visually, Orm's expanding empire appears terrifying through giant underwater battle fleets. Glowing weapons, armored soldiers, massive sea creatures, royal ceremonies, and futuristic Atlantean cities preparing for war. Meanwhile, Arthur and Mera discover ancient clues connected to the lost trident of Atlan hidden within long-forgotten Atlantean ruins filled with dangerous traps and mysterious puzzles. Visually, their adventure becomes exciting through collapsing structures, hidden mechanisms, giant statues, underwater temples, ancient maps, and breathtaking locations inspired by mythology and lost civilizations. Emotionally, Arthur slowly begins respecting Atlantis' history and culture for the first time because he realizes the underwater world contains beauty, tragedy, and complexity beyond the anger he carried since childhood. Meanwhile, Mera and Arthur grow emotionally closer during their dangerous journey because both understand the enormous responsibility now resting upon them to prevent global destruction. Visually, their partnership creates emotional balance between humor, action, romance, and adventure while constantly moving the story forward through dangerous situations across oceans and ancient ruins. Meanwhile, David Kane fully transforms into Black Manta after receiving advanced Atlantean technology and armor capable of challenging Arthur directly. Emotionally, Kane becomes consumed entirely by revenge because he blames Aquaman for his father's death and believes destroying Arthur will finally give meaning to his pain and anger. Visually, Black Manta appears extremely dangerous through glowing red armor, giant laser weapons, advanced combat systems, and aggressive fighting skills that make him one of Aquaman's deadliest enemies. Meanwhile, Orm secretly manipulates Kane into attacking Arthur because emotionally Orm views Black Manta as a useful distraction capable of weakening Arthur while Atlantis prepares for larger war. Meanwhile, Arthur and Mera eventually travel to Sicily after discovering another clue connected to the hidden location of Atlan's trident. Visually, the city appears beautiful through ancient architecture, colorful streets, historic buildings, ocean views, and adventurous treasure hunting sequences that create a completely different atmosphere compared to the underwater kingdoms. Emotionally, Arthur begins opening himself emotionally to Mera because for the first time he feels someone truly understands the loneliness and confusion he experienced growing up between two worlds. Meanwhile, Black Manta launches a sudden attack against Arthur and Mera in Sicily using powerful Atlantean weapons and advanced combat armor. Visually, the battle becomes spectacular through explosions, rooftop combat, laser attacks, collapsing buildings, high-speed chases, and intense hand-to-hand fighting across the ancient city. Emotionally, Arthur realizes Black Manta's hatred has transformed him into an extremely dangerous enemy willing to destroy innocent lives simply for revenge. Meanwhile, Mera proves herself fearless and incredibly powerful during the battle by using her water manipulation abilities creatively against enemies and dangerous situations. Visually, the action sequences combine superhero combat with fantasy powers and large-scale destruction, creating some of the movie's most exciting moments. Meanwhile, Arthur eventually defeats Black Manta during the brutal confrontation, causing Kane to fall deep into the ocean after his damaged armor explodes violently. Emotionally, Arthur feels conflicted because although Kane tried killing him repeatedly, he still understands revenge and hatred destroyed the man emotionally long before the battle ended. Meanwhile, Orm continues preparing Atlantis for full-scale war against humanity because emotionally he believes conquering the surface world is necessary to secure Atlantis' future forever. Visually, giant underwater armies, advanced warships, armored sea creatures, glowing battlefields, and massive military formations continue showing the enormous scale of the coming conflict. Meanwhile, Arthur and Mera realize time is running out because only the true king capable of finding Atlan's trident can stop Orm before millions of innocent lives become trapped in catastrophic war between Atlantis and humanity. Visually, Aquaman continues blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, political conflict, treasure hunting, romance, revenge, giant sea battles, and breathtaking visual effects while exploring how identity, responsibility, compassion, leadership, family loss, destiny, and the connection between two worlds slowly shape Arthur Curry into the future king of Atlantis and the legendary hero known as Aquaman. Aquaman continues as Arthur Curry and Princess Mera move closer toward discovering the legendary Trident of Atlan while King Orm's growing military empire threatens to ignite catastrophic war between Atlantis and the surface world. Visually, the movie becomes even more breathtaking through glowing underwater kingdoms, ancient ruins, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean technology, colorful oceans, massive battle fleets, and emotionally powerful cinematography that constantly combines fantasy adventure with large-scale superhero action. Meanwhile, Arthur slowly begins accepting that his destiny may truly be connected to Atlantis despite the anger and pain he carried since childhood after losing his mother and feeling rejected by both worlds. Emotionally, Arthur continues struggling with self-doubt because he never imagined himself becoming a king or leader. However, Mera believes his compassion, courage, and understanding of humanity make him far more worthy of ruling Atlantis than Orm, whose obsession with power and revenge continues pushing the oceans toward destruction. Meanwhile, Orm strengthens alliances between the underwater kingdoms while convincing Atlanteans that humanity deserves punishment for polluting the oceans and destroying marine life for centuries. Emotionally, many underwater citizens support Orm because they genuinely fear the surface world will eventually destroy Atlantis completely if no action is taken. Visually, Orm's growing empire appears enormous through giant underwater armies, glowing warships, armored soldiers riding sea creatures, advanced Atlantean weapons, royal ceremonies, and massive battle formations preparing for war against humanity. Meanwhile, Arthur and Mera continue following ancient clues connected to the hidden location of Atlan's trident because they realize only the rightful king capable of wielding the legendary weapon can unite Atlantis peacefully and stop Orm before millions die in war. Visually, their journey becomes increasingly adventurous through ancient maps, dangerous puzzles, collapsing ruins, hidden temples, mysterious symbols, underwater caverns, and breathtaking locations inspired by mythology and lost civilizations. Emotionally, Arthur and Mera grow even closer during their dangerous mission because both understand the enormous responsibility resting upon them and begin trusting each other deeply. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives the violent battle in Sicily despite severe injuries and damaged armor. Emotionally, David Kane's hatred toward Aquaman becomes even stronger because he believes Arthur destroyed everything meaningful in his life. Visually, Black Manta appears terrifying and determined while rebuilding his damaged armor and preparing for future revenge against Arthur using advanced Atlantean technology. Meanwhile, Arthur and Mera eventually discover the hidden path leading toward the Lost Kingdom connected to Atlan's trident. However, reaching the legendary weapon requires traveling through one of the most dangerous and mysterious regions beneath the ocean filled with terrifying creatures and ancient dangers. Visually, the underwater world becomes darker and more mysterious through giant trenches, glowing monsters, ancient ruins, deadly sea creatures, abandoned civilizations, and frightening deep-sea environments unlike anything Arthur has experienced before. Emotionally, Arthur begins understanding the true scale and ancient history of Atlantis because the underwater civilization existed long before modern humanity and contains countless forgotten kingdoms, legends, and secrets hidden beneath the oceans. Meanwhile, Mera reveals more emotional vulnerability as she explains her fears about Atlantis destroying itself through endless violence and political ambition if Orm gains complete power over the oceans. Emotionally, Arthur realizes Mera's dedication comes not from ambition but from genuine love for her people and hope for peace between both worlds. Meanwhile, Orm officially prepares his armies for larger attacks against humanity because emotionally he believes conquering the surface world will secure Atlantis' future forever even if millions of innocent people die during the conflict. Visually, the growing military preparations become spectacular through giant underwater fleets, glowing weapons, armored sea creatures, futuristic battle formations, and enormous underwater kingdoms preparing for war. Meanwhile, Arthur and Mera eventually reach the terrifying Trench Kingdom where monstrous sea creatures attack anyone entering their territory. Visually, the scenes become intense and horrifying through giant waves, Dark oceans, monstrous creatures, violent storms, and desperate survival sequences as Arthur and Mera struggle against endless attacks from terrifying underwater monsters. Emotionally, Arthur refuses abandoning Mera despite overwhelming danger because he finally understands true leadership means protecting others even when survival seems impossible. Meanwhile, both manage escaping the Trench Kingdom and arrive at a hidden ancient location connected directly to the lost kingdom of Atlantis and the legendary Trident of Atlan. Visually, the mysterious hidden world appears beautiful and magical through glowing oceans. Ancient architecture, peaceful environments, and breathtaking landscapes untouched by modern civilization for thousands of years. Emotionally, Arthur realizes his journey is no longer simply about stopping Orm because he now understands Atlantis represents part of his identity. Family history, and destiny whether he accepts it or not. Visually, Aquaman continues blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, political conflict, romance, treasure hunting, revenge, giant sea battles, and breathtaking visual effects while exploring how identity, leadership, responsibility, compassion, destiny, family loss, and the connection between two worlds slowly shape Arthur Curry into the future king of Atlantis and the legendary hero known as Aquaman. Aquaman continues as Arthur Curry and Princess Mera finally reach one of the most mysterious hidden locations connected to the ancient history of Atlantis while King Orm's growing empire moves closer toward launching full-scale war against humanity. Visually, the movie becomes even more magical and breathtaking through glowing oceans, ancient hidden kingdoms, giant sea creatures, mysterious underwater ruins, colorful landscapes, advanced Atlantean technology, and emotionally powerful cinematography that constantly combines fantasy adventure with emotional storytelling and large-scale superhero action. Meanwhile, Arthur slowly begins understanding that his journey is no longer only about stopping Orm because Atlantis itself has become deeply connected to his identity. Family history, and destiny. Despite the anger and pain he carried since childhood after losing his mother and feeling rejected by both worlds, emotionally Arthur still doubts whether he deserves becoming king because he never wanted political power or responsibility. However, Mera continues believing Arthur's compassion, courage, and understanding of both humanity and Atlantis make him uniquely capable of uniting two worlds peacefully, unlike Orm, whose growing obsession with power threatens endless destruction. Meanwhile, the hidden location Arthur and Mera discover appears untouched by time because it contains ancient Atlantean history lost for thousands of years. Visually, the environment becomes beautiful and dreamlike through glowing water. Peaceful oceans, ancient statues, mysterious architecture, tropical landscapes, and giant creatures living far away from war and political conflict. Emotionally, Arthur feels amazed because for the first time he experiences Atlantis not as a kingdom driven by violence or political ambition but as a civilization once connected deeply to nature, balance, and wisdom. Meanwhile, Arthur unexpectedly discovers the shocking truth that his mother Atlanta survived all these years after being sent away from Atlantis long ago. Emotionally, the reunion between Arthur and Atlanta becomes one of the movie's most powerful moments because Arthur spent his entire life believing he lost her forever while Atlanta never stopped loving or hoping to see her son again. Visually, the emotional atmosphere becomes beautiful through peaceful oceans, tearful conversations, warm embraces, and breathtaking scenery that creates a powerful contrast against the violence and warfare happening across Atlantis. Meanwhile, Atlanta explains how she survived alone within the Hidden Kingdom after escaping death and spending years isolated from both Atlantis and the surface world. Emotionally, Arthur feels overwhelmed because he finally understands his mother never abandoned him willingly and sacrificed everything to protect her family from Atlantis' political cruelty. Meanwhile, Atlanta reveals the final truth about the legendary Trident of Atlan, explaining that only the true king worthy of Atlantis can claim the weapon from the dangerous creature guarding it deep beneath the oceans. Visually, the mythology surrounding the Trident becomes increasingly epic through ancient legends, giant sea monsters, forgotten kingdoms, glowing ruins, and mysterious underwater environments connected to Atlantis' origins. Emotionally, Arthur realizes becoming king is not about power or revenge but about protecting people, creating peace, and uniting divided worlds together. Meanwhile, Orm officially launches larger military operations while continuing uniting the underwater kingdoms beneath his command because emotionally he believes war against humanity will restore Atlantis' greatness forever. Visually, the preparations for war become enormous through giant underwater armies, armored sea creatures, glowing battle fleets, futuristic weapons, massive underwater cities, and spectacular military formations preparing for global conflict. Meanwhile, Black Manta continues rebuilding himself emotionally and physically after surviving previous battles with Arthur. Emotionally, his hatred toward Aquaman completely consumes his identity because revenge remains the only purpose giving meaning to his suffering and anger. Visually, Black Manta appears increasingly dangerous through upgraded armor, glowing red weapons, advanced combat systems, and terrifying Atlantean technology designed specifically to destroy Aquaman. Meanwhile, Arthur prepares for the dangerous journey toward Atlan's trident, knowing the path ahead contains deadly challenges and ancient creatures capable of killing even the strongest warriors. Emotionally, Arthur finally begins accepting that leadership requires sacrifice, courage, and responsibility far beyond personal anger or fear. Meanwhile, Mera and Atlantis support Arthur because both believe he represents the final hope capable of saving Atlantis and humanity from catastrophic destruction caused by Orm's growing obsession with conquest and control. Visually, the adventure becomes increasingly epic through giant underwater caverns, ancient ruins, glowing oceans, mysterious creatures, dangerous landscapes, and breathtaking fantasy environments unlike anything seen earlier in the movie. Emotionally, Arthur's journey transforms from a personal struggle about identity into a larger mission about protecting innocent lives and restoring balance between two worlds divided by fear, hatred, and political ambition. Visually, Aquaman continues blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, destiny, revenge, giant sea battles, and breathtaking visual effects while exploring how identity, leadership, compassion, sacrifice, family love, responsibility, and the connection between two different worlds slowly shape Arthur Curry into the future king of Atlantis and the legendary hero known as Aquaman. Aquaman continues as Arthur Curry prepares for the most dangerous challenge of his life while Atlantis moves closer toward catastrophic war under King Orm's growing empire. Visually, the movie reaches an even more breathtaking level through glowing underwater kingdoms. Giant sea creatures, ancient ruins, colorful oceans, massive battle fleets, mysterious hidden worlds, and emotionally powerful cinematography that constantly combines fantasy adventure with emotional storytelling and spectacular superhero action. Meanwhile, Arthur finally begins emotionally accepting the truth about his destiny after reuniting with his mother Atlanna because for the first time he understands he was never abandoned and that his family sacrificed everything to protect him from Atlantis' political cruelty. Emotionally, the reunion changes Arthur deeply because the anger and loneliness he carried throughout childhood slowly transform into determination and responsibility. Meanwhile, Atlanna explains more about the ancient legends surrounding the Trident of Atlan and the dangerous creature guarding the weapon deep beneath the oceans. Visually, the mythology surrounding Atlantis becomes increasingly epic through forgotten kingdoms, giant underwater caverns, glowing ruins, ancient statues, mysterious symbols, and breathtaking environments untouched for thousands of years. Emotionally, Arthur realizes becoming king is not about gaining power or revenge but about protecting innocent lives and uniting two worlds divided by fear, hatred, and political ambition. Meanwhile, Princess Mera continues supporting Arthur because emotionally she believes he is the only person capable of bringing peace between Atlantis and humanity before Orm destroys both civilizations through endless war. Visually, Mera appears fearless and powerful through her royal armor, advanced combat abilities, and graceful control over water during dangerous situations. Meanwhile, King Orm officially gathers enormous military forces from the underwater kingdoms while preparing to attack the surface world on a global scale. Emotionally, Orm becomes completely consumed by his belief that humanity deserves punishment for polluting and destroying the oceans. Visually, his expanding empire appears terrifying through giant underwater armies. Glowing warships, armored sea creatures, futuristic Atlantean weapons, royal battle formations, and spectacular underwater cities preparing for conquest. Meanwhile, Arthur begins the dangerous journey toward Atlan's trident, knowing the legendary weapon remains protected by an ancient creature capable of destroying anyone unworthy of claiming it. Visually, the underwater environments become darker and more mysterious through giant trenches, glowing caverns, deadly sea monsters, abandoned ruins, violent currents, and massive underwater landscapes filled with danger and ancient secrets. Emotionally, Arthur finally stops running from responsibility because he understands millions of innocent lives depend upon his success. Meanwhile, Black Manta continues preparing for revenge against Aquaman while upgrading his armor and weapons using advanced Atlantean technology. Emotionally, David Kane's hatred completely controls his life because revenge against Arthur remains the only purpose motivating him after losing his father. Visually, Black Manta appears even more dangerous through glowing red armor, powerful laser weapons, advanced combat systems, and terrifying technology specifically designed to kill Aquaman. Meanwhile, Arthur eventually reaches the hidden location where the Trident of Atlan waits, guarded by the gigantic mythical creature known as the Carathan. Visually, the creature appears enormous and terrifying through giant tentacles, glowing eyes, powerful movements, and overwhelming presence deep within the ancient underwater kingdom. Emotionally, Arthur realizes the challenge is not simply physical strength because the trident can only be claimed by someone truly worthy of becoming king. Meanwhile, instead of attacking blindly, Arthur communicates peacefully with the Carathan using his rare ability to speak with sea creatures. Emotionally, this moment becomes extremely important because it proves Arthur possesses compassion, wisdom, and understanding rather than simple aggression or desire for power like Orm. Visually, the scene becomes magical and emotional through glowing oceans, ancient ruins, giant sea creatures, and beautiful underwater environments surrounding Arthur as he demonstrates the qualities of a true king. Meanwhile, the Carathan finally recognizes Arthur as worthy and allows him to claim the legendary Trident of Atlan. Visually, the moment becomes spectacular as Arthur rises holding the glowing golden trident while wearing the legendary armor of Atlantis, surrounded by giant sea creatures and ancient power. Emotionally, Arthur finally accepts his destiny completely because he understands leadership means protecting both Atlantis and humanity rather than ruling through fear or violence. Meanwhile, Atlana and Mera proudly watch Arthur transform into the true king Atlantis desperately needs before total war destroys everything. Visually, the emotional atmosphere becomes inspiring through heroic music, glowing oceans, ancient power, and breathtaking fantasy imagery showing Arthur finally embracing the hero he was always meant to become. Meanwhile, Orm prepares his final military assault, unaware that Arthur has successfully claimed the legendary trident and now possesses the power capable of challenging Atlantis' greatest armies. Visually, Aquaman continues blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, destiny, giant sea battles, revenge, and breathtaking visual effects while exploring how leadership, compassion, sacrifice, identity, family love, courage, and the connection between two different worlds slowly shape Arthur Curry into the true king of Atlantis and the legendary hero known as Aquaman. Aquaman continues as Arthur Curry finally embraces his destiny as the rightful king of Atlantis while King Orm launches the final stage of his massive war against both Atlantis and the surface world. Visually, the movie becomes even more spectacular through giant underwater armies, glowing battle fleets, colorful oceans, massive sea creatures, ancient Atlantean armor, powerful weapons, exploding warships, and emotionally powerful cinematography that combines fantasy mythology with epic superhero action on a breathtaking scale. Meanwhile, Arthur emerges holding the legendary Trident of Atlan while wearing the ancient golden armor of Atlantis. Emotionally, this moment represents Arthur fully accepting his identity after spending his entire life struggling between the human world and Atlantis because he now understands his mixed heritage is not a weakness but the reason he can unite both civilizations peacefully. Visually, Arthur appears more powerful and confident than ever before as giant sea creatures surround him while the oceans themselves seem to recognize their true king returning at last. Meanwhile, Princess Mera and Queen Atlanna proudly stand beside Arthur because emotionally they finally see hope for Atlantis after years of political corruption, fear, and growing violence under Orm's rule. Meanwhile, King Orm officially begins his assault while commanding enormous underwater armies gathered from the allied kingdoms preparing for war against humanity. Emotionally, Orm believes complete conquest represents the only way to protect Atlantis from destruction caused by the surface world. However, his obsession with power and control has transformed him into a ruler driven more by anger than wisdom or compassion. Visually, the battlefield becomes enormous through thousands of armored Atlantean soldiers, glowing weapons, giant sharks carrying warriors, futuristic warships, underwater explosions, and massive sea creatures colliding during one of the biggest underwater battles ever shown in a superhero movie. Meanwhile, Arthur arrives riding the gigantic Carathan creature while leading armies loyal to the rightful king of Atlantis. Visually, the scene becomes breathtaking as giant sea monsters emerge from the oceans beside Arthur, creating a legendary and heroic entrance that shocks Orm's forces completely. Emotionally, many Atlanteans begin realizing Arthur truly may be the chosen ruler described in ancient legends because only the rightful king could command the Carathan and wield Atlan's legendary trident. Meanwhile, massive warfare erupts across the oceans as underwater kingdoms battle each other through explosions, advanced Atlantean technology, brutal combat, collapsing warships, glowing energy weapons, and giant creatures attacking across the battlefield. Visually, the action becomes fast, colorful, and chaotic while the oceans transform into a gigantic war zone threatening both Atlantis and humanity. Meanwhile, Mera fights fearlessly beside Arthur using her water manipulation abilities against enemy soldiers while protecting innocent people trapped inside the growing destruction. Emotionally, Mera remains completely loyal to Arthur because she believes his leadership represents the only hope for peace between the surface world and Atlantis. Meanwhile, Black Manta briefly returns, still consumed by hatred toward Aquaman and determined to continue revenge against Arthur no matter the consequences. Emotionally, Kane's obsession with vengeance completely destroys his humanity because he cares more about hurting Arthur than protecting innocent lives. Visually, Black Manta's upgraded armor and glowing red weapons make him appear extremely dangerous during the battle sequences as explosions and laser attacks spread destruction throughout the battlefield. Meanwhile, Arthur confronts Orm directly in an emotional and brutal final battle that will decide the future ruler of Atlantis. Visually, the fight becomes spectacular through giant underwater combat, glowing tridents, powerful strikes, advanced Atlantean weapons, collapsing structures, and emotional intensity as two brothers battle for the fate of two worlds. Emotionally, Arthur fights not because he desires power but because he wants to stop endless violence and protect innocent lives, while Orm fights believing conquest and domination are necessary for Atlantis' survival. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna suddenly appears before the armies alive after years of being believed dead, which shocks Orm and completely changes the emotional atmosphere surrounding the battle. Emotionally, Orm becomes overwhelmed because discovering his mother survived forces him to confront the truth that many of his actions were built upon anger, grief, and misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Arthur eventually defeats Orm but chooses showing mercy instead of killing him because emotionally Arthur understands true leadership requires compassion rather than revenge or cruelty. Visually, the battle ends dramatically as Atlantean armies stop fighting while Arthur stands victorious holding the trident of Atlantis, surrounded by cheering warriors and giant sea creatures recognizing him as the true king. Emotionally, Atlantis finally begins accepting Arthur because his courage, compassion, humanity, and wisdom prove he deserves becoming ruler more than anyone else. Meanwhile, Arthur reunites emotionally with both his parents as Atlanna returns to Thomas Curry after many years apart, creating one of the movie's most heartfelt and emotional moments. Visually, the ending becomes beautiful through peaceful oceans, reunited family members, glowing underwater kingdoms, and hopeful imagery representing unity between Atlantis and humanity for the first time in generations. Visually, Aquaman concludes its epic story by blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, destiny, revenge, and breathtaking visual effects while exploring how compassion, leadership, identity, sacrifice, courage, family love, and the connection between two worlds transform Arthur Curry into the true king of Atlantis and the legendary hero known as Aquaman. Aquaman continues toward its emotional conclusion as Arthur Curry officially becomes the true king of Atlantis after ending the devastating conflict that nearly destroyed both the underwater kingdoms and the surface world. Visually, the movie delivers one final breathtaking spectacle through glowing underwater cities, giant sea creatures, colorful oceans, massive Atlantean armies, advanced technology, royal ceremonies, peaceful kingdoms, and emotionally powerful cinematography that combines fantasy mythology with superhero drama and epic adventure. Meanwhile, after defeating King Orm during their brutal final battle, Arthur chooses mercy instead of revenge because emotionally he understands true leadership means protecting people and creating peace rather than ruling through fear, hatred, or violence. Visually, Arthur stands holding the legendary trident of Atlan while Atlantean soldiers and sea creatures recognize him as the rightful king described in ancient legends. Emotionally, this moment becomes extremely important because Arthur spent his entire life feeling rejected by both humanity and Atlantis, yet now finally understands his mixed heritage is what allows him to unite two completely different worlds together peacefully. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna's unexpected return shocks all of Atlantis because everyone believed she died many years earlier after being sent away by the royal kingdom. Emotionally, Orm becomes devastated after realizing many of his actions were driven by grief, loneliness, anger, and misunderstanding surrounding his mother's disappearance. Visually, the emotional atmosphere changes completely as the enormous battlefield slowly becomes peaceful and Atlantean armies stop fighting after witnessing the truth about Atlanna and Arthur's victory. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly stands beside Arthur because emotionally she always believed his compassion, humanity, courage, and wisdom made him the only person capable of saving Atlantis from destroying itself through endless war and political ambition. Visually, Mera appears graceful and powerful beside Arthur while the oceans around them glow beautifully during Atlantis' transition toward peace and unity. Meanwhile, Orm finally accepts defeat after understanding Arthur defeated him not through cruelty or revenge but through honor and compassion. Emotionally, Orm realizes Arthur truly possesses the qualities necessary for leadership, unlike himself whose obsession with power and hatred nearly caused catastrophic destruction across the world. Meanwhile, Atlanna emotionally reunites with Thomas Curry after many painful years apart, creating one of the movie's most heartfelt scenes because their love survived separation, political conflict, loneliness, and impossible distance between two worlds. Visually, the reunion becomes beautiful through peaceful ocean waves, warm sunlight, emotional embraces, quiet conversations, and touching family moments that create a perfect contrast against the giant wars and destruction shown throughout the movie. Emotionally, Arthur finally experiences true happiness because both his parents are reunited and Atlantis finally accepts him as part of their world instead of rejecting him for his mixed bloodline. Meanwhile, Atlantis begins entering a new era under Arthur's leadership because for the first time a ruler truly understands both the underwater kingdoms and humanity equally. Emotionally, Arthur hopes creating peace between both civilizations will prevent future wars and allow Atlantis to stop hiding in fear and anger beneath the oceans. Visually, the underwater kingdoms appear more hopeful and united through glowing cities, peaceful armies, colorful oceans, giant sea creatures swimming freely, and royal ceremonies celebrating the arrival of Atlantis' new king. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives the final conflict despite losing his battle against Arthur, which hints that his hatred and desire for revenge may continue in the future. Emotionally, David Kane remains trapped by anger and vengeance because he refuses letting go of the pain caused by his father's death. Visually, Black Manta's damaged armor and survival scene create suspense for future conflicts that may threaten Aquaman later. Meanwhile, Arthur officially embraces the identity of Aquaman completely because emotionally he no longer sees himself as someone trapped between two worlds but as the bridge capable of connecting humanity and Atlantis together peacefully. Visually, Arthur's final appearance as king becomes heroic and inspiring through golden Atlantean armor, the legendary trident, glowing oceans, giant sea creatures, and breathtaking underwater imagery symbolizing hope, unity, strength, and destiny fulfilled at last. Meanwhile, the movie ends with Atlantis finally opening itself emotionally toward a future no longer controlled by fear, hatred, or endless political conflict because Arthur's leadership represents compassion and balance instead of domination or revenge. Visually, Aquaman concludes its epic fantasy adventure by blending superhero action, emotional family storytelling, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, destiny, revenge, breathtaking visual effects, and powerful emotional themes while exploring how identity, compassion, sacrifice, leadership, courage, family love, responsibility, and the connection between two worlds transform Arthur Curry into the legendary hero and true king of Atlantis known forever as Aquaman. Aquaman continues beyond the great underwater war as Arthur Curry slowly adjusts to his new life as the true king of Atlantis while enormous responsibilities begin changing both his personal life and the future of the oceans forever. Visually, the movie's final world-building remains breathtaking through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, royal palaces, colorful Atlantean cities, advanced underwater technology, and emotionally rich cinematography that constantly balances fantasy beauty with superhero mythology and emotional storytelling. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally struggles with the pressure of leadership because although he successfully defeated Orm and united Atlantis, he still spent most of his life living as a simple outsider far away from royal politics and responsibilities. Emotionally, Arthur fears making mistakes because millions of Atlanteans now depend upon his decisions for peace, safety, and survival. Meanwhile, Princess Mera continues supporting Arthur during his transition into kingship because emotionally she understands how difficult it feels balancing responsibility with personal identity, especially while trying to unite civilizations that spent centuries fearing and hating each other. Visually, Mera appears strong and graceful beside Arthur while Atlantis slowly transforms under their leadership into a more hopeful and peaceful kingdom. Meanwhile, Queen Atlana and Thomas Curry finally enjoy peaceful family moments together after years of separation caused by political cruelty and impossible distance between the surface world and Atlantis. Emotionally, their reunion symbolizes the movie's central message that love and compassion can survive even the greatest hardships. Visually, the lighthouse once again becomes a warm emotional location filled with sunlight, ocean waves, family memories, and peaceful happiness compared to the giant wars and destruction that nearly consumed the world earlier. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly begins changing under Arthur's leadership because for the first time the underwater kingdom has a ruler who truly understands both humanity and Atlantean culture equally. Emotionally, many Atlanteans remain uncertain about accepting change because generations of fear and anger toward the surface world cannot disappear instantly. However, Arthur believes trust and peace must begin somewhere even if progress feels slow and difficult. Visually, Atlantis continues appearing magnificent through glowing towers, underwater highways, giant sea creatures, advanced technology, royal courts, and beautiful ocean landscapes that make the hidden civilization feel ancient, magical, and alive. Meanwhile, Orm remains emotionally broken after losing the throne because his entire identity was built around the belief that conquering humanity would protect Atlantis forever. Emotionally, Orm struggles with guilt and confusion after realizing his anger nearly caused catastrophic destruction across both worlds. However, Arthur's decision to spare his life instead of killing him begins slowly changing Orm's understanding of leadership, compassion, and strength. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives the final conflict and is eventually discovered injured but alive, still wearing damaged Atlantean armor. Emotionally, David Kane's hatred toward Aquaman continues growing stronger because revenge remains the only purpose giving meaning to his suffering after losing his father. Visually, Black Manta appears darker and more dangerous while mysterious scientists examine his advanced Atlantean technology and discuss its incredible power. Meanwhile, Arthur officially begins embracing the public identity of Aquaman because emotionally he no longer hides from his responsibilities or fears his connection to Atlantis. Instead, he now understands his destiny as protecting both the oceans and humanity from future threats. Visually, Arthur's heroic presence becomes inspiring through golden Atlantean armor, the legendary trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures obeying his commands, and peaceful underwater kingdoms recognizing him as their rightful king. Meanwhile, humanity slowly becomes aware that Atlantis truly exists beneath the oceans, which changes global politics, fear, curiosity, and scientific interest forever. Emotionally, the surface world reacts with uncertainty because many humans still fear Atlantis after witnessing giant tidal waves, underwater attacks, and evidence of advanced civilizations hidden beneath the seas for thousands of years. Meanwhile, Arthur hopes his leadership can eventually build trust between both worlds and prevent future wars caused by misunderstanding, greed, pollution, and political ambition. Visually, the oceans now appear more connected than ever before through peaceful underwater scenes, giant sea creatures swimming freely, glowing cities, and symbolic imagery representing balance between humanity and Atlantis at last. Emotionally, Arthur's journey feels complete because he transformed from a lonely outsider struggling with identity into a confident hero capable of protecting two worlds through courage, compassion, and wisdom rather than hatred or domination. Visually, Aquaman ultimately leaves audiences with a hopeful and emotional ending by blending superhero action, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, family storytelling, destiny, breathtaking visual effects, and emotional themes, while showing how identity, sacrifice, compassion, leadership, courage, responsibility, and love can unite even the most divided worlds through the journey of Arthur Curry becoming the legendary king of Atlantis known forever as Aquaman. Aquaman continues exploring the aftermath of Arthur Curry's victory as the oceans finally enter a fragile period of peace while new emotional and political challenges begin rising beneath the surface. Visually, the movie's world remains breathtaking through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, royal Atlantean palaces, advanced technology, colorful coral cities, and emotionally rich cinematography that constantly balances fantasy beauty with superhero mythology and emotional family storytelling. Meanwhile, Arthur slowly adapts to life as the true king of Atlantis while struggling with the enormous responsibilities connected to leadership because protecting entire civilizations requires far more than simply winning battles. Emotionally, Arthur still feels uncertain at times because he spent most of his life as an outsider disconnected from Atlantean politics and traditions. However, he now understands his mixed heritage gives him a unique ability to unite humanity and Atlantis together peacefully. Meanwhile, Princess Mera continues helping Arthur understand royal responsibilities because emotionally she believes Atlantis finally has a ruler capable of leading through compassion rather than fear or conquest. Visually, Arthur and Mera appear increasingly united while working together inside Atlantis' glowing royal courts surrounded by giant sea creatures, futuristic underwater architecture, and loyal Atlantean warriors. Meanwhile, many Atlanteans slowly begin accepting Arthur despite his human bloodline because emotionally his courage, mercy, and wisdom during the final war proved he truly cares about protecting innocent lives rather than gaining personal power. However, some political leaders remain suspicious of humanity and fear Arthur's desire for peace may weaken Atlantis in the future. Emotionally, these tensions reveal that centuries of hatred and fear cannot disappear instantly even after Orm's defeat. Meanwhile, Queen Atlana and Thomas Curry finally enjoy the peaceful life they lost years earlier when Atlantis separated them through political cruelty and royal traditions. Visually, the lighthouse once again becomes a warm emotional symbol of family, love, and hope through quiet ocean sunsets, peaceful waves, warm conversations, and touching moments between reunited family members. Emotionally, Arthur treasures these peaceful experiences because for most of his life he believed happiness and family unity were impossible dreams stolen from him forever. Meanwhile, Orm remains alive after Arthur spared him during the final battle, which creates emotional uncertainty throughout Atlantis because many citizens expected the former king to die after his defeat. Emotionally, Orm begins questioning the beliefs and anger that controlled his life for so many years because Arthur defeated him not through cruelty but through mercy and compassion. Meanwhile, Black Manta secretly survives despite his brutal defeat during the underwater war and continues rebuilding himself emotionally and physically while blaming Aquaman entirely for his suffering. Emotionally, David Kane's hatred grows even darker because revenge remains the only purpose keeping him alive after losing his father and failing repeatedly to destroy Arthur. Visually, Black Manta's damaged armor, glowing red technology, and dangerous Atlantean weapons continue making him appear like one of Aquaman's deadliest future enemies waiting patiently for another opportunity to strike. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly begins reconnecting with the surface world after centuries of secrecy because Arthur believes peace can only exist if both civilizations stop viewing each other entirely through fear and hatred. Emotionally, humanity reacts with confusion and uncertainty because the existence of Atlantis changes everything people believed about history, science, and the oceans forever. Visually, the underwater kingdoms continue appearing magnificent through glowing towers, giant oceans, advanced technology, colorful marine life, and breathtaking fantasy landscapes hidden beneath the seas for thousands of years. Meanwhile, Arthur officially embraces his role as Aquaman because emotionally he no longer feels trapped between two worlds but instead understands he was destined to become the bridge capable of protecting both civilizations together. Visually, Arthur's heroic image becomes legendary through golden Atlantean armor, the Trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures obeying his commands, and peaceful underwater kingdoms recognizing him as their rightful ruler. Meanwhile, the movie's emotional themes continue emphasizing that compassion, mercy, family love, and understanding are far more powerful than hatred, revenge, fear, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded not by conquering others but by bringing divided worlds together peacefully. Visually, Aquaman leaves behind a hopeful and emotional legacy by blending superhero action, fantasy adventure, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, family storytelling, destiny, breathtaking visual effects, and emotional themes while showing how identity, courage, sacrifice, leadership, responsibility, compassion, and love transformed Arthur Curry from a lonely outsider into the legendary king of Atlantis and the heroic protector of two worlds known forever as Aquaman. Aquaman continues its emotional ending by showing how Arthur Curry's rise as the true king of Atlantis slowly begins changing both the underwater kingdoms and the human world after generations of fear, hatred, and separation between the two civilizations. Visually, the movie remains breathtaking through glowing underwater cities, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, colorful coral kingdoms, royal palaces, advanced Atlantean technology, and emotionally rich cinematography that constantly balances fantasy mythology with emotional family storytelling and superhero adventure. Meanwhile, Arthur continues learning how difficult leadership truly becomes after war ends because maintaining peace between divided societies often feels harder than winning battles. Emotionally, Arthur still struggles at times with royal responsibilities because he spent most of his life living freely on the surface world without understanding Atlantean traditions, politics, or royal expectations. However, he now accepts that his destiny was never simply becoming powerful but becoming someone capable of protecting innocent lives in both worlds equally. Meanwhile, Princess Mera remains beside Arthur, helping him understand Atlantis more deeply because emotionally she believes his compassion and humanity represent the future Atlantis desperately needs after centuries of rulers driven by fear, anger, and conquest. Visually, Arthur and Mera together symbolize unity between two worlds through their royal presence inside Atlantis' glowing underwater palaces surrounded by giant sea creatures and beautiful ocean landscapes. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna finally experiences peace after years of loneliness and separation from her family because emotionally she sacrificed everything to protect Arthur during his childhood, knowing Atlantis' political cruelty would destroy their lives if she stayed. Visually, Atlanna's emotional reunion with Thomas Curry continues creating warmth and humanity within the story through peaceful lighthouse scenes, quiet conversations, ocean sunsets, and touching family moments that contrast beautifully against the giant wars and destruction shown earlier. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly begins adapting to Arthur's leadership as many Atlanteans cautiously accept change while others remain fearful of humanity due to centuries of conflict and environmental damage caused by the surface world. Emotionally, Arthur understands trust cannot be created instantly because fear and hatred become deeply rooted after generations of violence and misunderstanding, However, he remains determined to build a future where Atlantis and humanity no longer see each other as enemies. Meanwhile, Orm remains emotionally devastated after losing his throne because his entire life was built around the belief that conquering humanity would protect Atlantis forever. Emotionally, Orm slowly begins realizing his anger and obsession with power blinded him from understanding true leadership, which requires compassion and wisdom rather than domination. Meanwhile, Arthur's decision to spare Orm instead of killing him continues, showing the emotional difference between both brothers because Arthur believes mercy creates hope while revenge only creates endless suffering. Visually, Orm appears isolated and emotionally broken while Atlantis slowly moves forward without the fear and militarism that once controlled the kingdom under his rule. Meanwhile, Black Manta secretly continues surviving in the shadows while recovering from his injuries and rebuilding his advanced armor using stolen Atlantean technology. Emotionally, David Kane remains consumed by revenge because his hatred toward Aquaman defines his entire existence after losing his father during the submarine attack. Visually, Black Manta appears even darker and more dangerous through damaged glowing armor, terrifying weapons, advanced technology, and emotionally cold determination suggesting future conflict remains inevitable. Meanwhile, humanity slowly reacts to the shocking truth that advanced civilizations exist beneath the oceans because Atlantis' existence completely changes humanity's understanding of history, science, and the planet itself. Emotionally, many humans fear Atlantis after witnessing giant tidal waves and underwater attacks, while others become fascinated by the possibility of peaceful connection between both worlds. Visually, news reports, ocean imagery, and symbolic scenes continue showing how Arthur's victory changed the world forever. Meanwhile, Arthur fully embraces the identity of Aquaman because emotionally he finally understands he does not need choosing between being human or Atlantean, since both sides together are what make him strong enough to unite divided civilizations peacefully. Visually, Arthur's final heroic image becomes legendary through golden Atlantean armor, the Trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures swimming beside him, glowing underwater kingdoms, and inspiring fantasy imagery representing hope, unity, strength, and destiny fulfilled at last. Emotionally, the story leaves behind a powerful message that compassion, family love, sacrifice, courage, and understanding possess far greater power than hatred, revenge, fear, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded by bringing people together rather than conquering them through violence. Visually, Aquaman concludes its epic fantasy superhero journey by blending emotional family storytelling, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, adventure, destiny, and emotional themes while showing how identity, leadership, compassion, responsibility, courage, sacrifice, and love transformed Arthur Curry from a lonely outsider into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic protector of two worlds known forever as Aquaman. Aquaman reaches its final emotional reflection as Arthur Curry fully steps into his new role as King of Atlantis, while both the underwater world and humanity slowly begin adapting to a future forever changed by his victory. Visually, the movie continues delivering breathtaking fantasy imagery through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean cities, colorful coral landscapes, royal palaces, and emotionally rich cinematography that constantly balances superhero mythology with emotional storytelling and family drama. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally realizes that becoming Aquaman was never only about gaining incredible powers or defeating enemies, because true leadership requires patience, wisdom, compassion, sacrifice, and the courage to protect people even when difficult choices must be made. Emotionally, Arthur still remembers the loneliness he experienced growing up between two worlds because humans saw him as strange while Atlantis viewed him as an outsider due to his mixed bloodline. However, he now understands those painful experiences are exactly what allow him to understand both civilizations better than anyone else. Meanwhile, Princess Mera continues supporting Arthur as both partner and future queen because emotionally she believes Atlantis finally has a ruler capable of creating lasting peace instead of endless conflict driven by fear and political ambition. Visually, Arthur and Mera together create a hopeful symbol of unity through their royal presence surrounded by glowing oceans, giant sea creatures, futuristic underwater technology, and beautiful Atlantean architecture. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna finally enjoys the peaceful life she lost many years earlier after escaping Atlantis to protect her family. Emotionally, Atlanna feels proud watching Arthur become the compassionate leader she always hoped he could become, because despite years of suffering he never allowed anger or hatred to destroy his humanity. Visually, the emotional family moments near the lighthouse continue creating warmth and peace through quiet ocean sunsets, crashing waves, warm conversations, and reunited loved ones finally sharing happiness after years of separation. Meanwhile, Thomas Curry experiences joy and disbelief because emotionally he never stopped loving Atlanna or hoping she might someday return from the oceans. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly begins changing under Arthur's leadership because for the first time the underwater kingdoms are ruled by someone who truly values balance between strength and compassion. Emotionally, many Atlanteans begin accepting Arthur's vision of peace while others remain fearful about trusting humanity after centuries of environmental destruction and conflict. However, Arthur understands healing divided worlds requires time, patience, and understanding instead of violence or domination. Visually, Atlantis appears more hopeful than ever before through glowing royal courts, peaceful underwater streets, giant marine creatures swimming freely, and symbolic imagery representing a kingdom entering a new era. Meanwhile, Orm quietly reflects upon his failures after losing the throne because emotionally he slowly begins realizing that his obsession with power and revenge nearly destroyed everything he wanted protecting. Meanwhile, Arthur's mercy continues affecting Orm deeply because he cannot understand why someone he considered weak chose compassion over revenge after victory. Visually, Orm appears emotionally isolated while Atlantis moves forward beyond the fear and militarism that once controlled the kingdom during his rule. Meanwhile, Black Manta secretly survives somewhere in the world, still consumed by hatred and revenge against Aquaman. Emotionally, David Kane remains trapped by anger because he believes destroying Arthur will somehow heal the pain caused by losing his father. Visually, Black Manta's damaged armor, glowing red technology, and dangerous Atlantean weapons continue hinting at future threats waiting beneath the surface despite the peace Arthur created. Meanwhile, humanity slowly learns more about Atlantis's governments. Scientists and ordinary people react with fear, curiosity, and fascination toward the discovery of advanced civilizations hidden beneath the oceans for thousands of years. Emotionally, Arthur hopes his leadership can eventually create trust between both worlds so future generations no longer grow up surrounded by hatred and misunderstanding. Visually, the oceans themselves become symbolic throughout the ending because they no longer represent separation between worlds but connection, unity, mystery, and hope for a peaceful future shared together. Meanwhile, Arthur fully embraces his destiny as Aquaman because emotionally he no longer feels confused about who he truly is, since he finally understands being both human and Atlantean is his greatest strength rather than a weakness. Visually, Arthur's final heroic presence becomes legendary through golden Atlantean armor, the glowing trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures responding to his commands, colorful underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery representing destiny fulfilled completely at last. Emotionally, the movie leaves behind a powerful message that compassion, family love, sacrifice, courage, responsibility, understanding, and unity possess far greater power than revenge, hatred, fear, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded not by conquering others but by bringing divided worlds together peacefully. Visually, Aquaman concludes its epic fantasy superhero adventure by blending underwater mythology, emotional family storytelling, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes while transforming Arthur Curry from a lonely outsider into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic protector of two worlds known forever as Aquaman. Aquaman closes its legendary journey with Arthur Curry finally accepting every part of his identity while Atlantis and the surface world slowly move toward a hopeful future shaped by peace instead of fear and war. Visually, the ending remains breathtaking through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean cities, royal ceremonies, colorful choral landscapes, and emotionally rich cinematography that constantly combines fantasy mythology with emotional family storytelling and superhero adventure. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally reflects upon how far his journey has taken him because he once lived as a lonely outsider confused about where he truly belonged after losing his mother and growing up rejected by both humanity and Atlantis. However, through pain, sacrifice, war, and self-discovery, he finally understands his greatest strength comes from being connected to both worlds equally. Emotionally, Arthur realizes he was never meant choosing between humanity and Atlantis because his destiny was always bringing them together. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly stands beside Arthur as his closest ally and future queen because emotionally she always believed compassion and understanding would make Arthur a far greater ruler than leaders motivated by fear, revenge, or political ambition. Visually, Arthur and Mera together symbolize hope for Atlantis through glowing royal palaces, peaceful underwater cities, giant sea creatures swimming freely, and beautiful fantasy imagery representing balance between strength and kindness. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna experiences emotional peace for the first time in many years because after sacrificing everything to protect her family, she can finally watch Arthur become the hero and leader she always dreamed he could become. Visually, Atlanna's peaceful moments with Thomas Curry near the lighthouse create warmth and emotional comfort through ocean sunsets, crashing waves, family conversations, and quiet happiness that contrasts beautifully against the destruction and warfare shown earlier in the story. Emotionally, Thomas feels grateful because despite years of loneliness and heartbreak, he never stopped believing Atlanna would someday return from the sea. Meanwhile, Atlantis slowly transforms under Arthur's leadership as many Atlanteans begin embracing hope for peaceful coexistence with humanity, even though generations of fear and hatred still remain difficult to overcome completely. Emotionally, Arthur understands true leadership requires patience because lasting peace cannot be created instantly after centuries of conflict and misunderstanding. However, he remains determined to guide Atlantis toward a future no longer controlled by revenge or isolation. Visually, Atlantis appears more alive and hopeful than ever before through glowing underwater highways, giant marine creatures, advanced Atlantean technology, peaceful royal courts, and colorful ocean landscapes filled with beauty instead of war. Meanwhile, Orm quietly begins accepting the truth that his obsession with conquest nearly destroyed Atlantis rather than saving it because emotionally he slowly realizes strength without compassion only creates endless suffering and destruction. Meanwhile, Arthur's choice to spare Orm instead of killing him continues proving why Arthur deserves becoming king because he values mercy and understanding over hatred and revenge. Visually, Orm remains isolated and reflective while Atlantis moves beyond the militaristic rule that once dominated the kingdom during his reign. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives somewhere in the world still consumed by anger and revenge toward Aquaman, which suggests peace may never remain permanent because hatred always continues searching for opportunities to return. Emotionally, David Kane cannot escape the pain and bitterness caused by losing his father because revenge completely controls his identity and purpose. Visually, Black Manta's damaged glowing armor and dangerous Atlantean technology continue hinting toward future threats hidden beneath the surface despite Arthur's victory. Meanwhile, humanity slowly begins accepting the reality that Atlantis exists beneath the oceans because the discovery changes history, science, politics, and humanity's understanding of the world forever. Emotionally, many humans remain frightened after witnessing giant tidal waves and underwater warfare, while others become fascinated by the possibility of peaceful connection between two civilizations separated for thousands of years. Meanwhile, Arthur officially embraces the name Aquaman completely because emotionally he no longer hides from his destiny or fears his connection to Atlantis, since he finally understands both sides together make him strong enough to protect the world from future threats. Visually, Arthur's final heroic image becomes unforgettable through golden Atlantean armor, the legendary trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures answering his commands, glowing oceans, and breathtaking fantasy imagery symbolizing destiny, unity, courage, and hope fulfilled at last. Emotionally, the movie leaves audiences with a powerful message that compassion, sacrifice, family love, courage, leadership, understanding, and unity are far stronger than fear, revenge, hatred, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded by healing divisions instead of creating more violence. Visually, Aquaman ultimately concludes its epic fantasy superhero adventure by blending emotional family storytelling, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes while transforming Arthur Curry from a confused outsider into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic protector of two worlds forever remembered as Aquaman. Aquaman finally leaves behind a grand emotional legacy as Arthur Curry fully transforms from an uncertain outsider into the legendary protector of the oceans and the true king of Atlantis. Visually, the movie's closing atmosphere remains spectacular through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean cities, royal palaces, colorful coral landscapes, and emotionally rich cinematography that constantly mixes fantasy mythology with emotional storytelling, superhero adventure, and epic visual spectacle. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally understands that his journey was never only about becoming powerful or defeating enemies, because the real challenge was learning how to accept every part of himself after spending his entire life feeling divided between two completely different worlds. Emotionally, Arthur remembers the loneliness he experienced during childhood after losing his mother and growing up misunderstood by humans while rejected by Atlantis because of his mixed bloodline. However, those painful experiences eventually became the reason he could understand both civilizations with compassion instead of hatred. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly remains beside Arthur because emotionally she always saw greatness within him long before Atlantis accepted him as king. Visually, Arthur and Mera together represent a hopeful future for Atlantis through glowing oceans, peaceful underwater cities, giant marine creatures, futuristic Atlantean architecture, and symbolic imagery showing balance between humanity and Atlantis finally becoming possible. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna experiences peace and happiness after years of suffering because emotionally she sacrificed everything to protect Arthur and never stopped believing he would someday unite both worlds together. Visually, the emotional scenes involving Atlanna and Thomas Curry near the lighthouse continue creating warmth and emotional comfort through peaceful sunsets, crashing waves, family conversations, and reunited love surviving impossible separation across many years. Emotionally, Thomas feels grateful because despite losing Atlanna for so long, he never gave up hope that their family would someday become whole again. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly changes under Arthur's compassionate leadership because for the first time the underwater kingdom is ruled by someone who understands strength means protecting people instead of controlling them through fear and violence. Emotionally, many Atlanteans begin embracing Arthur's vision for peace even though centuries of fear, political conflict, and hatred toward humanity still remain difficult to erase completely. However, Arthur believes understanding and patience can eventually heal the divisions separating both civilizations. Visually, Atlantis now appears more peaceful and beautiful than ever before through glowing underwater highways, royal ceremonies, advanced technology, giant sea creatures swimming freely, and colorful fantasy environments filled with life instead of war. Meanwhile, Orm quietly reflects upon the mistakes that transformed him from a prince wanting to protect Atlantis into a ruler consumed entirely by revenge and conquest. Emotionally, Orm slowly realizes Arthur's compassion and mercy made him stronger than violence ever could because true leadership requires wisdom and understanding rather than domination. Meanwhile, Arthur's choice to spare Orm becomes one of the story's most important emotional moments because it proves Arthur values peace above revenge even after suffering years of pain caused by Atlantis. Visually, Orm remains emotionally isolated while the kingdom moves beyond the militaristic fear and aggression that once controlled Atlantis during his reign. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives somewhere beyond the oceans, still consumed by rage and hatred toward Aquaman because emotionally David Kane cannot escape the pain caused by losing his father and continues believing revenge will eventually heal his suffering. Visually, Black Manta's damaged armor, glowing red technology, and dangerous Atlantean weapons continue hinting that future dangers still wait beneath the surface despite the peace Arthur created. Meanwhile, humanity slowly begins adjusting to the reality that advanced civilizations exist beneath the oceans because Atlantis completely changes the world's understanding of history. Science, and life itself. Emotionally, many humans remain frightened by Atlantis while others feel curiosity and hope toward possible connection between the two worlds. Meanwhile, Arthur fully embraces the identity of Aquaman because emotionally he finally accepts that being both human and Atlantean is not a weakness but the reason he can protect both civilizations equally. Visually, Arthur's final heroic image becomes legendary through golden Atlantean armor, the glowing trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures responding to his commands, colorful underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery representing destiny fulfilled completely. Emotionally, the story ultimately delivers a powerful message that compassion, family love, sacrifice, courage, leadership, mercy, and understanding possess greater strength than revenge, hatred, fear, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded by uniting divided worlds rather than conquering them through violence. Visually, Aquaman ends as an epic fantasy superhero adventure filled with emotional family storytelling, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes while forever transforming Arthur Curry into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic protector of two worlds known across the oceans as Aquaman. Aquaman concludes with Arthur Curry standing as a symbol of unity between two civilizations that spent centuries separated by fear, anger, and misunderstanding. Visually, the movie's final emotional atmosphere remains stunning through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, colorful coral landscapes, advanced Atlantean cities, royal palaces, and breathtaking cinematography that constantly blends fantasy mythology with emotional storytelling and superhero adventure. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally realizes his entire life prepared him for this destiny because growing up between humanity and Atlantis taught him compassion, resilience, loneliness, and understanding in ways no ordinary ruler could ever experience. Emotionally, Arthur no longer feels ashamed or confused about his mixed heritage because he finally understands both sides together are what make him strong enough to protect the world from destruction. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly supports Arthur as Atlantis slowly enters a new era built upon hope instead of conquest. Emotionally, Mera feels relieved because after witnessing Orm's growing obsession with war, she feared Atlantis would destroy itself through endless violence and political ambition. Visually, Arthur and Mera together appear powerful and inspiring through glowing underwater palaces, peaceful oceans, giant marine creatures, futuristic Atlantean architecture, and symbolic imagery representing balance between power and compassion. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna continues experiencing emotional peace after years of heartbreak and sacrifice because she can finally watch her family reunited and safe after spending so much of her life separated from them by Atlantis, cruel traditions and political rules. Visually, Atlanna and Thomas Curry's peaceful moments near the lighthouse remain warm and emotional through crashing ocean waves, quiet conversations, soft sunlight, and family happiness finally restored after many painful years apart. Emotionally, Thomas still feels amazed that the mysterious woman he once rescued during a storm eventually became the Queen of Atlantis and the mother of the world's greatest underwater hero. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly transforms under Arthur's leadership because many Atlanteans begin understanding that isolation, fear, and hatred only create more suffering and conflict over time. Emotionally, Arthur hopes future generations of Atlanteans and humans can grow up without seeing each other as enemies because he understands peace begins when people learn understanding instead of fear. Visually, Atlantis appears more beautiful and peaceful than ever before through glowing underwater highways, giant sea creatures swimming freely, advanced technology, colorful kingdoms, and royal ceremonies celebrating a hopeful future beyond war. Meanwhile, Orm quietly accepts the painful truth that his obsession with conquest nearly destroyed the very kingdom he wanted protecting because emotionally he allowed anger and revenge to control his decisions instead of wisdom or compassion. Meanwhile, Arthur's mercy continues haunting Orm emotionally because he realizes true strength belongs to leaders capable of forgiveness rather than violence. Visually, Orm remains separated from power while Atlantis moves beyond the militaristic aggression that once consumed the kingdom during his reign. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives hidden somewhere beyond the ocean, still driven entirely by hatred toward Aquaman because emotionally David Kane remains unable to let go of the pain caused by his father's death and continues believing revenge will give meaning to his suffering. Visually, Black Manta's damaged glowing armor and dangerous Atlantean technology continue hinting that future threats may rise again despite Arthur's victory and the peace now spreading across Atlantis. Meanwhile, humanity slowly begins understanding the oceans hide mysteries far greater than anyone ever imagined because Atlantis changes the world forever through its existence. Emotionally, people across the surface world react with fear, curiosity, fascination, and uncertainty while trying understanding how two civilizations might coexist peacefully after remaining separated for thousands of years. Meanwhile, Arthur completely embraces his identity as Aquaman because emotionally he finally understands he belongs to both worlds equally and his destiny is protecting the balance between them. Visually, Arthur's final heroic appearance becomes unforgettable through golden Atlantean armor, the legendary trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures responding to his commands, glowing underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery symbolizing hope, courage, unity, and destiny fulfilled completely at last. Emotionally, the movie ultimately delivers a timeless message that compassion, sacrifice, family love, leadership, courage, mercy, and understanding possess far greater power than revenge, fear, hatred, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded by bringing divided worlds together rather than ruling through violence or domination. Visually, Aquaman ends as a massive fantasy superhero epic filled with emotional family storytelling, underwater mythology, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes while forever transforming Arthur Curry from a lonely outsider into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic protector of two worlds known throughout the oceans as Aquaman. Aquaman finishes its legendary adventure by showing how Arthur Curry's journey changes not only Atlantis but also his understanding of himself, family, responsibility, and the meaning of true leadership. Visually, the ending remains grand and breathtaking through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean cities, colorful coral landscapes, royal palaces, and emotionally beautiful cinematography that constantly combines fantasy mythology with superhero adventure and emotional family storytelling. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally reflects upon everything he survived, including losing his mother during childhood, growing up feeling isolated between two worlds, discovering Atlantis' hidden history, facing betrayal, fighting giant underwater wars, and finally accepting the destiny he spent years trying to avoid. Emotionally, Arthur realizes every painful experience shaped him into someone capable of protecting both humanity and Atlantis equally with compassion instead of hatred. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly stands beside Arthur because emotionally she always believed Atlantis needed a ruler who understood kindness, mercy, and balance rather than conquest and fear. Visually, Arthur and Mera together symbolize hope for the future through glowing underwater palaces, peaceful oceans, giant marine creatures swimming freely, futuristic Atlantean technology, and fantasy imagery representing unity between civilizations once divided by centuries of anger and misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna finally experiences true happiness because after sacrificing everything to protect Arthur, she can now watch her son become the compassionate king she always hoped he would become. Visually, Atlanna's peaceful family moments with Thomas Curry continue creating warmth and emotional comfort through quiet ocean sunsets, crashing waves, loving conversations, and reunited family members finally sharing peace after years of heartbreak and separation. Emotionally, Thomas feels proud because the young boy he raised near a lonely lighthouse eventually became the legendary protector of the oceans and the ruler of Atlantis itself. Meanwhile, Atlantis slowly enters a new era under Arthur's leadership because for the first time the kingdom is guided by someone who values peace and understanding more than power or domination. Emotionally, many Atlanteans begin accepting that humanity cannot simply be treated as enemies forever because Arthur's example proves cooperation and compassion create more hope than endless conflict. However, Arthur also understands healing centuries of fear and political division will require patience and wisdom over many years. Visually, Atlantis now appears more alive and peaceful through glowing underwater highways, giant sea creatures, advanced technology, colorful marine environments, and royal celebrations replacing the fear and warfare that once consumed the oceans. Meanwhile, Orm quietly struggles emotionally with the consequences of his actions because he finally understands his obsession with revenge and conquest nearly destroyed the kingdom he believed he was protecting. Emotionally, Orm slowly recognizes Arthur's mercy and compassion as qualities far stronger than violence because true kings protect life instead of ruling through fear. Visually, Orm remains isolated from power while Atlantis continues moving beyond the militaristic aggression and political hatred that dominated the kingdom during his rule. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives hidden somewhere in the world, still consumed by hatred toward Aquaman because emotionally David Kane remains trapped by grief and revenge after losing his father. Visually, Black Manta's damaged glowing armor and dangerous Atlantean weapons continue suggesting future dangers still exist despite the peace Arthur created across the oceans. Meanwhile, humanity gradually begins understanding the oceans contain mysteries beyond imagination because Atlantis forever changes the world's understanding of history, science, and civilization itself. Emotionally, people across the surface world respond with curiosity, fear, fascination, and uncertainty while trying imagining a future where humans and Atlanteans may eventually coexist peacefully. Meanwhile, Arthur fully embraces his destiny as Aquaman because emotionally he finally understands he no longer needs choosing between being human or Atlantean since both identities together make him strong enough to unite and protect two worlds at once. Visually, Arthur's final heroic image becomes legendary through golden Atlantean armor, the glowing trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures answering his commands, colorful underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery representing destiny, courage, leadership, and hope completely fulfilled. Emotionally, the movie leaves audiences with a timeless message that compassion, sacrifice, family love, courage, mercy, understanding, and unity possess far greater strength than revenge, hatred, fear, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded by healing divisions and inspiring hope rather than conquering others through violence. Visually, Aquaman concludes as an epic fantasy superhero story filled with underwater mythology, emotional family storytelling, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes while forever transforming Arthur Curry into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic guardian of two worlds known forever across the oceans as Aquaman. Aquaman reaches its final emotional farewell as Arthur Curry fully accepts his place as the bridge between humanity and Atlantis while the oceans finally move toward peace after generations filled with fear, political conflict, and war. Visually, the movie continues ending on a breathtaking note through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, colorful coral landscapes, advanced Atlantean cities, royal palaces, and emotionally beautiful cinematography that constantly mixes fantasy mythology with emotional storytelling and superhero adventure. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally realizes his journey was never simply about becoming king because the true purpose of his destiny was learning how compassion and understanding can unite worlds divided by hatred and misunderstanding for centuries. Emotionally, Arthur remembers growing up feeling alone and disconnected because humans considered him strange while Atlantis rejected him because of his mixed bloodline. However, he now understands those experiences gave him the wisdom needed to protect both civilizations equally without choosing one side over the other. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly remains beside Arthur because emotionally she always believed Atlantis needed a leader capable of mercy, patience, and compassion rather than fear and conquest. Visually, Arthur and Mera together create a powerful symbol of hope through glowing underwater palaces, peaceful oceans, giant marine creatures, futuristic Atlantean architecture, and fantasy imagery representing balance between strength and kindness. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna experiences emotional happiness after years of sacrifice and separation because she can finally watch her family reunited while Arthur becomes the compassionate ruler she always believed he could become. Visually, Atlanna and Thomas Curry's emotional moments near the lighthouse continue bringing warmth and humanity to the story through quiet sunsets, crashing ocean waves, family conversations, and peaceful happiness replacing the loneliness and heartbreak that once defined their lives. Emotionally, Thomas feels proud seeing the boy he raised become the legendary protector of the oceans and the ruler capable of uniting Atlantis with humanity peacefully. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly transforms under Arthur's leadership because many Atlanteans begin understanding that fear and isolation only create endless suffering and violence. Emotionally, Arthur hopes future generations can grow up without inheriting the hatred that divided the surface world and Atlantis for thousands of years. However, he also understands creating trust between civilizations will require patience, wisdom, and courage over time. Visually, Atlantis now appears more peaceful and hopeful than ever before through glowing underwater highways, giant sea creatures swimming freely, advanced technology, colorful kingdoms, and royal ceremonies celebrating the beginning of a new era beyond war and political ambition. Meanwhile, Orm quietly reflects upon the mistakes that allowed anger and revenge to consume his life because emotionally he finally realizes true leadership means protecting people through compassion instead of ruling them through fear. Meanwhile, Arthur's decision to spare Orm instead of killing him continues proving why Arthur truly deserves becoming king, because mercy and understanding ultimately made him stronger than violence or hatred ever could. Visually, Orm remains separated from power while Atlantis slowly moves beyond the militaristic aggression and obsession with conquest that once controlled the kingdom during his reign. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives hidden somewhere beyond the oceans, still driven entirely by revenge against Aquaman because emotionally David Kane cannot escape the grief and bitterness caused by losing his father during the submarine attack. Visually, Black Manta's damaged armor, glowing red technology, and dangerous Atlantean weapons continue hinting future threats still exist beneath the surface despite Arthur's victory and the peace spreading across Atlantis. Meanwhile, humanity slowly begins understanding the oceans contain ancient mysteries and civilizations far greater than anyone ever imagined because Atlantis changes history forever through its existence. Emotionally, people across the surface world respond with fear, fascination, curiosity, and uncertainty while imagining how humans and Atlanteans may someday coexist peacefully after remaining separated for thousands of years. Meanwhile, Arthur completely embraces his identity as Aquaman because emotionally he finally understands being both human and Atlantean is not a weakness but the reason he can protect and unite two worlds together. Visually, Arthur's final heroic appearance becomes unforgettable through golden Atlantean armor, the legendary trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures answering his commands, glowing underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery symbolizing hope, courage, leadership, destiny, and unity fulfilled completely at last. Emotionally, the story ultimately delivers a timeless message that compassion, sacrifice, family love, courage, mercy, understanding, and unity possess far greater strength than revenge, hatred, fear, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded by healing divisions and inspiring hope instead of conquering others through violence. Visually, Aquaman ends as a massive fantasy superhero epic filled with underwater mythology, emotional family storytelling, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes while forever transforming Arthur Curry into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic guardian of two worlds known throughout the oceans as Aquaman. Aquaman delivers its final powerful emotional message as Arthur Curry stands proudly as the true king of Atlantis and the protector capable of bringing peace between two worlds once divided by fear, hatred, and misunderstanding. Visually, the movie's closing moments remain breathtaking through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, colorful coral landscapes, advanced Atlantean technology, royal palaces, and emotionally stunning cinematography that constantly blends fantasy mythology with emotional storytelling and epic superhero adventure. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally reflects upon how much his life changed from growing up as a lonely outsider near a small lighthouse to becoming the legendary ruler of Atlantis and hero known across the oceans as Aquaman. Emotionally, Arthur understands the pain and confusion he experienced during childhood were never meaningless because those struggles helped him develop compassion and empathy for both humans and Atlanteans equally. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly supports Arthur because emotionally she always believed Atlantis needed a ruler who valued understanding and mercy more than conquest or political power. Visually, Arthur and Mera together symbolize a hopeful future through glowing underwater palaces, peaceful oceans, giant marine creatures, futuristic Atlantean architecture, and fantasy imagery representing unity between civilizations once separated by centuries of fear and violence. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna experiences deep emotional peace because after years of sacrifice, heartbreak, and loneliness she can finally watch her family reunited while Arthur fulfills the destiny she always believed awaited him. Visually, Atlanna and Thomas Curry's emotional moments continue bringing warmth to the story through ocean sunsets, quiet conversations, crashing waves, and peaceful family happiness replacing the pain and separation that defined so much of their lives. Emotionally, Thomas feels amazed that the son he raised with love and kindness eventually became the legendary protector of the oceans and the king capable of changing Atlantis forever. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly enters a new era under Arthur's compassionate leadership because many Atlanteans begin realizing that fear, revenge, and isolation only create endless suffering and war. Emotionally, Arthur hopes future generations of Atlanteans and humans will someday live without inheriting the hatred and mistrust that divided their worlds for thousands of years. However, he also understands peace requires patience, wisdom, sacrifice, and constant effort because old wounds cannot heal instantly. Visually, Atlantis now appears more peaceful and alive than ever before through glowing underwater highways, giant sea creatures swimming freely, advanced technology, colorful marine landscapes, and royal celebrations replacing the militaristic fear and aggression that once controlled the kingdom. Meanwhile, Orm quietly reflects upon the mistakes that allowed anger and revenge to dominate his life because emotionally he finally understands true strength comes from protecting people through compassion rather than controlling them through fear or violence. Meanwhile, Arthur's decision to spare Orm instead of killing him continues proving why Arthur truly deserves becoming king because mercy ultimately made him stronger than hatred ever could. Visually, Orm remains separated from power while Atlantis slowly moves beyond the obsession with conquest and war that once defined his rule. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives somewhere beyond the ocean, still consumed entirely by revenge against Aquaman because emotionally David Kane remains trapped by grief and bitterness after losing his father. Visually, Black Manta's damaged glowing armor and dangerous Atlantean weapons continue hinting that future dangers still exist despite the peace Arthur created across Atlantis and the surface world. Meanwhile, humanity slowly begins accepting that the oceans contain civilizations and mysteries beyond imagination because Atlantis changes the world forever through its existence. Emotionally, people across the surface world react with fascination, fear, curiosity, and uncertainty while imagining how humans and Atlanteans may someday coexist peacefully after remaining separated for centuries. Meanwhile, Arthur completely embraces his identity as Aquaman because emotionally he finally understands being both human and Atlantean is the reason he can unite and protect both worlds together without choosing one over the other. Visually, Arthur's final heroic image becomes unforgettable through golden Atlantean armor, the legendary trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures obeying his commands, glowing underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery symbolizing destiny, leadership, courage, hope, and unity finally fulfilled. Emotionally, the movie ultimately leaves audiences with a timeless message that compassion, sacrifice, family love, courage, mercy, understanding, and unity possess far greater strength than revenge, hatred, fear, or political ambition because Arthur succeeded not by conquering others through violence but by inspiring hope and healing divisions between worlds. Visually, Aquaman concludes as an epic fantasy superhero adventure filled with underwater mythology, emotional family storytelling, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes while forever transforming Arthur Curry into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic guardian of two worlds known throughout the oceans as Aquaman. Aquaman reaches its final grand conclusion as Arthur Curry fully accepts the responsibility of protecting both Atlantis and humanity while proving that compassion and unity can overcome centuries of hatred, fear, and political conflict. Visually, the ending remains absolutely breathtaking through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean cities, colorful coral landscapes, royal palaces, and emotionally powerful cinematography that constantly combines fantasy mythology with emotional family storytelling and epic superhero adventure. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally realizes that becoming Aquaman was never simply about power, strength, or royal blood, because true greatness comes from understanding others, protecting innocent lives, and choosing mercy even after experiencing pain and betrayal. Emotionally, Arthur remembers how isolated he once felt growing up between two worlds because humans viewed him as strange while Atlantis rejected him because of his mixed bloodline. However, those struggles eventually gave him the empathy needed to unite civilizations that spent thousands of years fearing and misunderstanding each other. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly stands beside Arthur because emotionally she always believed Atlantis needed a ruler guided by wisdom, compassion, and courage rather than revenge and conquest. Visually, Arthur and Mera together represent hope for the future through glowing underwater palaces, peaceful oceans, giant marine creatures, futuristic Atlantean architecture, and fantasy imagery symbolizing balance between humanity and Atlantis at last. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna finally experiences emotional peace after years of loneliness and sacrifice because she can now watch her reunited family standing together safely while Arthur fulfills the destiny she always knew awaited him. Visually, Atlanna and Thomas Curry's emotional scenes near the lighthouse continue bringing warmth and humanity to the story through quiet sunsets, crashing ocean waves, loving conversations, and peaceful family happiness replacing years of separation and heartbreak. Emotionally, Thomas feels proud realizing the boy he raised near the ocean eventually became the legendary protector of the seas and the king capable of changing Atlantis forever. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly transforms under Arthur's compassionate leadership because many Atlanteans begin understanding that fear, isolation, and hatred only create endless violence and suffering across generations. Emotionally, Arthur hopes future humans and Atlanteans can someday live together without inheriting the anger and mistrust that divided their worlds for centuries. However, he understands peace requires patience, sacrifice, and constant effort because healing old wounds takes time. Visually, Atlantis now appears more alive and peaceful than ever before through glowing underwater highways, giant sea creatures swimming freely, advanced technology, colorful marine kingdoms, and royal celebrations replacing the militaristic aggression that once dominated the oceans. Meanwhile, Orm quietly reflects upon how revenge and obsession with conquest nearly destroyed the kingdom he believed he was protecting because emotionally he finally understands compassion creates stronger leaders than violence or fear ever could. Meanwhile, Arthur's decision to spare Orm instead of killing him becomes one of the story's most important emotional moments because it proves Arthur values healing and mercy above revenge. Visually, Orm remains separated from power while Atlantis slowly moves beyond the fear and militarism that once controlled the kingdom during his reign. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives somewhere in the shadows, still consumed entirely by hatred toward Aquaman because emotionally David Kane remains trapped by grief and bitterness after losing his father and refuses abandoning revenge despite everything that happened. Visually, Black Manta's damaged glowing armor and dangerous Atlantean technology continue hinting that future dangers still exist beneath the surface despite Arthur's victory and the peace now spreading across Atlantis. Meanwhile, humanity slowly accepts that the oceans contain ancient civilizations and mysteries far beyond imagination because Atlantis changes history, science, and the future of the world forever. Emotionally, people across the surface world react with curiosity, fear, fascination, and uncertainty while imagining whether humans and Atlanteans may eventually coexist peacefully after remaining separated for thousands of years. Meanwhile, Arthur completely embraces his destiny as Aquaman because emotionally he finally understands that being both human and Atlantean is not a weakness but the reason he can unite and protect two worlds together. Visually, Arthur's final heroic image becomes unforgettable through golden Atlantean armor, the legendary trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures obeying his commands, glowing underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery symbolizing destiny, courage, leadership, hope, and unity completely fulfilled at last. Emotionally, the movie leaves audiences with a timeless message that compassion, sacrifice, family love, courage, mercy, understanding, and unity possess greater power than hatred, revenge, fear, or political ambition, because Arthur succeeded not by conquering others through violence but by inspiring hope and healing divisions between worlds. Visually, Aquaman concludes as a massive fantasy superhero epic filled with underwater mythology, emotional family storytelling, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes, while forever transforming Arthur Curry into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic guardian of two worlds known throughout the oceans as Aquaman. Aquaman ends its unforgettable fantasy adventure with Arthur Curry finally becoming the legendary hero and king capable of uniting two worlds that remained divided by fear, hatred, and misunderstanding for generations. Visually, the movie's final moments remain breathtaking through glowing underwater kingdoms, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, advanced Atlantean cities, colorful coral landscapes, royal palaces, and emotionally stunning cinematography that constantly blends superhero action with fantasy mythology and emotional family storytelling. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally understands that his journey was never only about claiming a throne or defeating enemies, because true leadership comes from compassion, sacrifice, courage, and the ability to protect people without allowing hatred or revenge to control the heart. Emotionally, Arthur remembers the loneliness and confusion he experienced during childhood after losing his mother and growing up rejected by Atlantis because of his mixed bloodline. However, those painful experiences eventually became the reason he could understand both humans and Atlanteans equally while building peace between civilizations that feared each other for centuries. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly remains beside Arthur because emotionally she always believed Atlantis needed a ruler guided by wisdom, mercy, and understanding instead of conquest or political ambition. Visually, Arthur and Mera together symbolize hope for the future through glowing underwater palaces, peaceful oceans, giant marine creatures, futuristic Atlantean architecture, and fantasy imagery representing harmony between humanity and Atlantis at last. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna finally experiences emotional happiness after years of sacrifice, loneliness, and heartbreak because she can now watch her family reunited safely while Arthur fulfills the destiny she always believed awaited him. Visually, Atlanna and Thomas Curry's emotional family scenes continue bringing warmth and humanity to the story through quiet sunsets, crashing ocean waves, loving conversations, and peaceful happiness replacing the pain and separation that once defined their lives. Emotionally, Thomas feels proud realizing the son he raised beside a lonely lighthouse eventually became the legendary protector of the oceans and ruler capable of changing Atlantis forever. Meanwhile, Atlantis slowly transforms under Arthur's compassionate leadership because many Atlanteans begin understanding that fear, isolation, and hatred only create endless suffering and war. Emotionally, Arthur hopes future generations of humans and Atlanteans can grow up without inheriting the anger and mistrust that divided their worlds for thousands of years. However, he understands true peace requires patience, wisdom, sacrifice, and time because old wounds cannot disappear instantly. Visually, Atlantis now appears more peaceful and alive than ever before through glowing underwater highways, giant sea creatures swimming freely, advanced technology, colorful marine kingdoms, and royal celebrations replacing the militaristic aggression that once controlled the oceans. Meanwhile, Orm quietly reflects upon how revenge and obsession with conquest nearly destroyed Atlantis because emotionally he finally realizes strength without compassion only creates destruction and suffering. Meanwhile, Arthur's decision to spare Orm instead of killing him proves why Arthur truly deserves becoming king because mercy ultimately made him stronger than violence or hatred ever could. Visually, Orm remains separated from power while Atlantis slowly moves beyond the fear and militarism that once defined his rule. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives hidden somewhere beyond the oceans, still consumed entirely by hatred toward Aquaman because emotionally David Kane remains trapped by grief and revenge after losing his father. Visually, Black Manta's damaged glowing armor and dangerous Atlantean weapons continue hinting future threats may still rise despite the peace Arthur created across Atlantis and the surface world. Meanwhile, humanity slowly begins accepting that the oceans contain ancient civilizations and mysteries beyond imagination because Atlantis changes history, science, and humanity's understanding of the world forever. Emotionally, people across the surface world react with curiosity, fascination, fear, and uncertainty while imagining whether humans and Atlanteans may someday coexist peacefully after remaining separated for centuries. Meanwhile, Arthur fully embraces his destiny as Aquaman because emotionally he finally understands that being both human and Atlantean is his greatest strength rather than a weakness, since it allows him to unite and protect both civilizations together. Visually, Arthur's final heroic image becomes unforgettable through golden Atlantean armor, the legendary trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures obeying his commands, glowing underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery symbolizing courage, leadership, destiny, hope, and unity completely fulfilled at last. Emotionally, the movie ultimately leaves audiences with a timeless message that compassion, sacrifice, family love, courage, mercy, understanding, and unity possess far greater power than revenge, hatred, fear, or political ambition, because Arthur succeeded not by conquering others through violence but by healing divisions and inspiring hope between worlds. Visually, Aquaman concludes as an epic fantasy superhero adventure filled with underwater mythology, emotional family storytelling, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes, while forever transforming Arthur Curry into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic guardian of two worlds known throughout the oceans as Aquaman. Aquaman leaves its final emotional impact by showing Arthur Curry standing proudly as the true king of Atlantis and the legendary hero capable of protecting both the underwater kingdoms and humanity together. Visually, the ending remains spectacular through glowing underwater cities, peaceful oceans, giant sea creatures, colorful coral landscapes, advanced Atlantean technology, royal palaces, and emotionally rich cinematography that constantly combines fantasy mythology with emotional storytelling and epic superhero adventure. Meanwhile, Arthur emotionally understands that his greatest strength never came from the legendary trident of Atlan or his incredible powers, because true leadership comes from compassion, courage, sacrifice, and the ability to understand people even after experiencing pain and rejection. Emotionally, Arthur remembers spending his childhood feeling disconnected from both worlds because humans viewed him as different while Atlantis rejected him because of his human bloodline. However, those painful experiences ultimately became the reason he could unite civilizations divided by fear and hatred for centuries. Meanwhile, Princess Mera proudly stands beside Arthur because emotionally she always believed Atlantis needed a ruler capable of wisdom and mercy instead of conquest and political aggression. Visually, Arthur and Mera together represent hope for a peaceful future through glowing underwater palaces, giant marine creatures swimming freely, futuristic Atlantean architecture, peaceful oceans, and fantasy imagery symbolizing harmony between humanity and Atlantis. Meanwhile, Queen Atlanna finally experiences true happiness because after sacrificing everything to protect Arthur, she can now watch her reunited family standing together safely while her son fulfills the destiny she always believed awaited him. Visually, Atlanna and Thomas Curry's emotional scenes near the lighthouse continue bringing warmth and humanity to the story through quiet sunsets, crashing waves, loving conversations, and peaceful family moments, replacing years of heartbreak and separation. Emotionally, Thomas feels deeply proud realizing the son he raised beside the ocean eventually became the legendary guardian of the seas and the king capable of changing Atlantis forever. Meanwhile, Atlantis itself slowly enters a hopeful new era under Arthur's compassionate leadership because many Atlanteans begin understanding that fear, hatred, and isolation only create endless suffering and war. Emotionally, Arthur hopes future generations can grow up without inheriting the anger and mistrust that separated Atlantis and humanity for thousands of years. However, he also understands creating true peace requires patience, sacrifice, wisdom, and constant effort because healing ancient wounds takes time. Visually, Atlantis now appears more peaceful and alive than ever before through glowing underwater highways, advanced technology, giant sea creatures, colorful marine kingdoms, and royal celebrations replacing the militaristic fear that once dominated the oceans. Meanwhile, Orm quietly reflects upon how revenge and obsession with conquest nearly destroyed the kingdom he believed he was protecting, because emotionally he finally realizes compassion and mercy create stronger rulers than violence or fear ever could. Meanwhile, Arthur's decision to spare Orm instead of killing him becomes one of the movie's most important emotional lessons, because it proves Arthur values healing and understanding above revenge. Visually, Orm remains separated from power while Atlantis slowly moves beyond the aggression and political hatred that once controlled the kingdom during his reign. Meanwhile, Black Manta survives somewhere hidden beyond the ocean, still consumed completely by revenge against Aquaman, because emotionally David Kane cannot escape the grief and bitterness caused by losing his father during the submarine attack. Visually, Black Manta's damaged glowing armor and dangerous Atlantean technology continue hinting that future threats may still rise despite Arthur's victory and the peace spreading across Atlantis. Meanwhile, humanity slowly begins understanding that the oceans contain mysteries and civilizations far beyond imagination, because Atlantis changes the world forever through its existence. Emotionally, people across the surface world react with fear, fascination, curiosity, and uncertainty while imagining how humans and Atlanteans might someday coexist peacefully after remaining separated for centuries. Meanwhile, Arthur fully embraces his destiny as Aquaman, because emotionally he finally understands being both human and Atlantean is not a weakness but the reason he can unite and protect two worlds equally. Visually, Arthur's final heroic image becomes legendary through golden Atlantean armor, the glowing trident of Atlan, giant sea creatures answering his commands, peaceful underwater kingdoms, and breathtaking fantasy imagery symbolizing destiny. Leadership, hope, courage, and unity completely fulfilled at last. Emotionally, the movie leaves audiences with a timeless message that compassion, sacrifice, family love, courage, mercy, understanding, and unity possess far greater power than hatred, revenge, fear, or political ambition, because Arthur succeeded by inspiring hope and healing divisions rather than conquering others through violence. Visually, Aquaman concludes as a massive fantasy superhero epic filled with underwater mythology, emotional family storytelling, romance, political conflict, giant sea battles, breathtaking visual effects, destiny, action, and emotional themes, while forever transforming Arthur Curry into the legendary king of Atlantis and heroic guardian of two worlds known across the oceans as Aquaman.